So I'm going to add in the other shapes. I do have 2 more circles, right? But before that, I have these eyes, and I also have sort of this shape here, which has a little bit of semblance of a nose down here as well. All of this is also on top of a neck and body. So next, let's work with the neck and body. I'm not going to do all the details, I'm just going to do a few. So I'll do an outline for this. I'm okay with going off the canvas. Right now, my shape does not have a fill-in, right? So it uses mostly the same settings as the previous shape I drew, which was this circle, right? So now the outline is white and the inside is transparent, and I think that's okay. I'm going to increase the stroke a little bit so we can see it better, right? And I'm also going to change to this rough outline like I did on the other. I could draw it again from here, right? Or I could also click, right? And set it exactly the way I want, like I showed with the circle. But I don't know exactly how I want it as far as measurements go. I just know that I want it relatively the same size as what's on here. Instead of drawing a new one, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this one. So Command C and Command V on a Mac, Control C and Control V on a PC, right? Because that will give me this rough outline that I've already applied, so that way I don't have to do that again. So I will then resize it with the little anchors. And then I want to work with these. Now, since the face is a very light color, it is a little difficult to see sort of where these lines are against here. So I want to go back to my layers panel. So I have a lot of options here, right? And this is similar to what I was working with in the other workspace. I do have layers down here, right? And I can click that. If I'm feeling a little unfamiliar with this because I've used mostly the other workspace, I could switch back to Essentials, and I can see it the way I had it before as well. So going to Layers, I'm going to double click on this layer again, and I'm going to change the color to something else. Maybe now I want blue. That might be easier to see against the light colors inside of the face. So I'm going to zoom in by doing Command plus, so that way I can work a little bit closer to the shapes of Paul Klee's eyes. We can make these eyes a couple different ways. I'm going to make one from an ellipse, right? I'm going to kind of drag it out and try to make it look similar-ish to the shape. I'm going to make the other one from a rectangle, right? I would not do them both ways if I was really doing this, but for the exercise, I don't think it's a bad idea. The outlines on the eyes should be black, right? So I'm going to go ahead and change those to black. So I'm clicking each shape. I'm double-clicking down here on the stroke, and I'm changing it to black, right? I could also change these to have that rough stroke, but I'll do that later. But the way that we did that before is through the workspace, and I'm not going to worry about that right now. I can do that later. So these eyes are not close to the way they actually are, right? This is not what those look like, so I need to modify them. So I can rotate them a little bit by hovering around the edges of the shape, right? And that can get the orientation a little bit closer. So hovering around the edges, I'm able to get this little rotation tooltip, right? And that will sort of symbolize that point. It can be a little difficult to select these shapes when they're hollow, right? If you're having a hard time, you could increase the stroke width, right? That can be done in this workspace, in this properties panel, right? And that might make it a little bit easier to click and work with, and we can always change the thickness and stuff of the stroke later. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to modify where the points are and some of those things. So that means we need to switch back to this white arrow tool, right? And then from here, I can go in here and click on these individual anchors and modify kind of how they are showing. Now if I move this anchor out of the way for right now, you can see that this ends in a point, right? And this other one also ends in a point. And that's kind of why I made this square, because this one ends in points, right? So these 2 points are closer to the edges of the corners of the square, whereas this round area is closer to the edges of a circle. So neither one is right? So we can fix that. If I click on a point, right, and I have my properties panel, my properties window open, down here we can see these choices to convert that point, that anchor point, right? So instead of having it be a curve, I can convert it to a corner, and that gets us much closer to the way this looks, right? And I can convert this one too. There we go. Now we have much closer to the way his eyes look. And then I can try to modify these to get the lines right. There we go. Now this one we have the opposite problem. We have corners already. We instead need to have curves. We can do this two ways. We can convert here, or we can pull down these corners. When you're working with a square shape and you have the direct selection tool selected, you have these little dots inside of the corners. If you pull on this, it will round the corners, right? Now that rounded all the corners, and that's not what we want. We could also, once we've clicked on the shape and we see all four dots, we could click a specific dot, right? And then once we've clicked that dot, then we can click again and pull it down, and that will only change that one. Now it's not perfect, right? We still aren't getting to be able to pull it all the way down, right? But all we've done is round that corner. Once we've rounded that corner, we can still click on this anchor point and move this to where we think it should go, and we can start to pull on these handles, and that can make that a little bit easier to work with too. Now it still is a little weird, right? Because now we have this rounded area, and we have a new point here which we didn't have before. So instead of pulling on that point there, which created additional points, right? Doing the smooth curve is probably easier, so that's what I'm going to actually choose. So doing that, we can then move this point here, and we can try to adjust these handles, and I'll do the same thing for the one down here. I'll change it to smooth, and I'll bend it about where I think it should go, and then try to adjust the handles, maybe here-ish. There we go, something like that. It takes a while to get used to the way these handles work. It's okay if you're not immediately good at it, right? It's going to take some time. Then we have two circles for eyes, right? We have a circle here-ish. I'm going to try to kind of start at the intersect between these 2 points, right? Now this is not a perfect circle, so we will need to modify these anchor points with the white arrow, the direct selection tool, right? Something like that. And we can do the same thing over here, so sort of here and there, that's sort of the intersection, right? We can kind of modify these to try to get them where we want. Now, it can be a little weird when you have multiple objects on here, because sometimes they do snap together. So you can click on points, and instead of moving them with your mouse, you can use your arrow keys. That can help. You can also go up to View, and you can turn snaps off. That could help. If you forget where snaps are, if you're on a Mac, the help function is very useful. You can type snap, and it will show you exactly where it is. The other option would be to actually go back into your Layers panel and lock this layer and create a new layer, because then when you have a layer locked, you're less likely to have problems with the objects below, just like we locked the background. So that's another option. Now I'm going to go ahead and undo what I did, because I had already gotten it to work.